Howdy of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Superman and Lois episode 11. So, I would say for this episode, I would just say thank God. Like the last two episodes for me were just kind of like okay, is this what it's going to be for like the rest of this season? It's just going to be this kind of episode where I'm just going to go but in this episode, we kind of go into almost the kind of the the most famous kind of Superman Justice League story, the man who has everything kind of style of story, where we do have kind of a replay of some scenes from the pilot of this episode. But I think really hands down, this is actually a much better origin story of the Superman character than whatever was put into the pilot. Like, there was a lot of rushing going on in that pilot episode. There was a lot of stuff to unpack in that episode. And I think in this episode was so much better than the actual origin episode or pilot episode of the show. I really actually did thoroughly enjoy this episode, and more than likely, a lot of people could have just been like, well, there's not a lot going on, or there's not enough, hey, let's get to the action scenes, or hey, let's get to that. Like, it's a lot of, like, going back over Superman's life through this episode, and that might not be exciting for everyone, but I thoroughly enjoyed this story because it was actually a Superman-heavy episode. What a coinkydink if you could actually have a heavy Superman episode or just a heavy Clark episode. Man, does that just easily win me over. Plus, also, it does some things with Superman and Lois that I've been wanting for 11 episodes now. For them to just kind of go off on their own and do their own thing, and then come back to Superman and family, or Superman and Lois and their two sons. Really, there was barely anything going on with Jonathan and Jordan in this episode, and I was like, yes! Thank God! Thank God we didn't have anything with Jonathan or Jordan in this episode. No offense to those actors, no offense to that role, or whatever that was in this episode. I'm like, thank God they actually had the title people actually in a bulk of this episode. Wow, what a concept. What a refreshing concept to have title screen people in most of episode. Wow. Refreshing. But we're also continuing on with the Morgan Edge stuff. The Tal Rowe, we're continuing on with that storyline in this episode. But it seems like more of the focus is to actually retell the origin of Superman when Superman was a very young, like, teenager going into the Fortress of Solitude and then going into training to become Superman, to then leave the Fortress of Solitude to understand why exactly he is this world's champion, or why he is here. Like, he needs to understand why he's willing to risk his life for others when he has nothing of his own life to risk. Because really just Clark wasn't really attached to this world. And so Jor-El was telling Kal-El that he needed to find something to be attached to on this planet. Eventually Kal-El does do so, or Clark. And so yeah, like, we get also, like, some cool stuff with Superman and Lois that I can't really talk about in spoilers, but, like, their origin of, like, showcasing the story of those characters, and I thought that was really fun. We do actually get some Smallville ties in here to showcase that that Lana actually was something important to Kent at some point, but we'll eventually get to that. But yeah, so man, did this episode just feel good after the last two were just kind of disappointing to me. I thought that this is overall feel good episode, but a lot of people could feel vastly different in all kinds of different directions. A lot of people could just be okay about this episode. A lot of people could just be like, no, I still think that this is not that good. Like, I think it's recycling the pilot, and that could be perfectly okay. But also, I like the fact that they're on in this, like, it's not just like, okay, we have to just kind of push like through all this stuff like they did in the pilot. They actually got to marinate on some things, and they actually got to showcase some like past things. Like, that's why I loved like Arrow so much. Like, where Arrow would give us the flashbacks of him actually going on the island, and at the same time it would actually show present day Arrow and how like these two things that he had learned through both current time and flashback kind of helped him throughout his journeys. Where in this episode, like, we don't exactly get that, but like it kind of feels like we can like see where everything is going to form to where it is in current time, Superman and Lois's story. And that's the thing that I actually enjoyed about this episode the most, was just kind of like the little bubbling things of forming where uh like, especially after that whole interview in this episode, if you know what I mean, talking about this in a very cryptic like sense at first, but yeah, good solid episode. If anybody had dropped off at this point thinking that this show was going to be awful and there's no saving it, this episode might bring people back, just to kind of see some actual Superman and Lois episode, and then eventually Jonathan and Jordan come up, and a big thing happens to one of the kids, and I'll go into that in spoilers. Feel good episode. Really enjoyed it. Really liked it. So I think it's about that time to go into spoilers about it, because I've talked about enough of it. So let's go into that double 5 time territory. I am probably not going to go into huge line details. A lot of people could easily tell through a lot of these reviews. I don't say line for line things. I just come up with sometimes my own variation of what people had said. If all of a sudden somebody's going to read a script and like, that's not what he said, or like, especially I think in the very last review, I said that like Jarrell had mentioned that basically like Jarrell was saying like, dude, that's not my story to tell. But what actually Jarrell said was like, well, like, I didn't feel there was a need to tell Talrow's story. Like, it kind of feels like the same thing. And so really, like, I might gripe about little things about that, but then again, I'm just like, well, it's going to go out. Like, if anything, I'm not going to redo a review just to nail something correctly on the lineage of whatever. People can understand in a roundabout way where I'm going about things. So with that said, let's get into it. So, in very cryptic-like sense, we are going to be seeing a fairly familiar spoiler time. It's about that time we get to spoil this episode. So we're going to see a very familiar face to really just a lot of Superman versus Batman people. We're going to actually see Martha Kent in this episode. I'm like, yay! Because this is early Superman. So we're actually going to see Martha in this episode. I'm like, oh, great. Like, cool. So we get to see, like, her before she dies. I'm like, okay, great. Spoilers for anybody who would watch the pilot episode of this show. She dies, sadly enough. But, because if you're randomly coming into this one, like, you're coming in really late. So anyways, in the more focus that I want to have on this is like the Superman guy. So we have very young teen-esh like Superman who is to want to go and have his crystal from his, of course from his spaceship, to tell him to go to North to go and form the Fortress of Solitude. Clark is to go off and try to have this red crystal, not green, because in the movie it was green, but I guess this crystal is red. I don't know what the difference is, but it is what it is. I guess they wanted to have a slight difference. I think also like the Smallville crystal I think was like blue or like silver or something. It was weird. Anyways, it's mood point. So so Clark is to eventually have this crystal keep leading him uh, like a metal detector of figuring where like the Fortress of Solitude should be, and then all of a sudden it stops, and then Clark is like, "Oh my God, this stopped! This stopped! Like, like so, what am I gonna do now?" Like he's screaming to the heavens of whoever Kryptonian is going to actually hear him. So Clark just gets frustrated and tosses the crystal into the ground to all of a sudden have the Fortress of Solitude form in front of him. And so my hand is a little bit, yeah, there we go. So it won't shake that much. So Kal-El is to make his way to the Fortress of Solitude, and that is when Jor-El is going to appear to him and greet him and be like, "Oh man, I've waited so long for this day, even though I'm technically a hologram, like to meet my son Kal-El." So we have, of course, Jor-El telling Kal-El about his heritage and everything about Krypton, and so Jor-El is telling Kal-El that he needs to now train, and Jor-El is going to help him with that. So we just see this sequence immediately quickly aging Kal-El, because we have to forcibly do that, to show Kal-El like running through the snow, and then him turning from seemingly teen Superman to then pilot Superman, the however young pilot Superman is compared to what he actually is in the current time. So we have pilot Superman. I'll just call him PS. So pilot Superman, or PS, is because this isn't actually current day Superman, so there's a whole thing of it. So maybe I'll say pre-soup. So pre-soup, that'll be quicker. Pre-Kent, yeah, pre-Kent. So pre-Kent goes back to Jor-El, and Jor-El has basically told him like, "Hey man, like you've learned everything that you could possibly learn from me. If anything, you need to now go out onto your planet and understand why you are going to be the champion of this planet. You need something to tie you here. You need something to ground you." Again, paraphrasing, but like it's basically the same thing of what Jor-El would say. So Kal-El is to go back onto Earth, or go back to Smallville, and the first thing that he is to do is go and try to find Lana Lang at that time. And so Clark is to go and try to find Lana, and we are to find out that Lana has her arms around Kyle, and it seems like Kyle is working on getting some job. And so Kent is just like, like, "Oh no, like I lost Lana, the one true love that I will not even get in Smallville, the other show." It'll just never happen. I don't know why. What if they would have changed this to Superman and Lana? Man, without a bit of... They should actually do that. What if they make one alternate Earth where Superman and Lana just got together? Like, maybe they'll just do one goofy episode where it's Superman and Lana. Like, I would be interested to see where that story heads. It probably would not make one lick of difference, but at least it would be something different that we could get for one episode. And more than likely, a lot of people would be like, "Dude, that would be a waste of time." But it would be interesting. I always wanted to see, like, what would have happened if, like, if Superman and Lana would have worked. but too bad. Anyways, I guess we got that good enough in the Smallville show. So pushing on. So Clark is to go on and just have his shoulder to be cried on via his mother, because he's like, man, like Lana, she's married and she's moving on, and like I guess like I should have figured that with me being gone so long, like people would have easily just like moved on and everything would have like not stayed the same and blah blah blah. So Clark just goes on to just say, well, like I might as well just go and just get a job instead of finding a woman, because maybe that'll happen afterwards. So Clark goes and just easily just gets a job at the Daily Planet, even though Perry White is just like laughing at Clark's resume, like, ha ha ha, ha. Yeah, right, buddy. It's like, if anything, this resume like may be good for Smallville, but it's like a whole gateway of nothing for Metropolis, buddy. Like, we have like Perry White that's just kind of like, I don't think so. But like Clark is like trying to talk to Perry and like trying to convince him to get this job, and Clark of course gets it because he's freaking Clark Kent. What, is he not going to work at the Daily Bugle or the Daily Planet because he's not Spider-Man? Like, what, is he not going to get the job at the Daily Planet and he's just going to go off and be some greenhorn in some like fisherman's ship somewhere? Like in Man of Steel? He should probably do that instead. Really, he should. But anyways, the pay would probably be better. So Clark goes and is to bump into Lois Lane. That is to have Lois mention to Clark, are you seriously going to wear a tie? And Clark is looking at her like, shouldn't I? So so Lois is just kind of irritated because Superman's in town, and Superman is like taking up every page one. He's taking up like every single like bit of articles because they have to continue to want to keep covering this guy and not really focus on the real true hard crime that is going on in Metropolis. So but Superman can't help it. He's cool. He's the flavor of the rest of their lives because he's the big cheese. Everybody loves him. So funny enough, like so Superman goes off and of course does the exact same thing that he does in the pilot. He ends up saving a kid from being crushed by this green, like I want to say it's like a PT Cruiser or something. It looks like that kind of small of a vehicle. And so he goes back to the same kid again. He's like, "Hey, yeah, my mother made this costume," and then he flies off again, like showcasing. But we actually get much more of this early costume Superman, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. Believe me, I thoroughly enjoyed it. So, but Lois is to tell Clark about what is the real true crime that is going on here, that it seems that the police are kind of missing, and Clark didn't realize that it was going on. So Clark is really actually just consistently helping Lois, getting her stories out there, but everyone else is just like, yeah, Superman saved the day yet again. Woohoo! Like, look at my first page story. And it's kind of funny that Clark is actually working against himself. That's actually really fun. Like, he's trying to, like, snuff down his own stories because he's like, dude, I didn't come here to be like the big like story. Like, no, like I came here just to help people, and like I didn't try to get fame out of this or fortune or whatever. No, like if anything, I want something much more important to me to be put in the forefront. So both Lois and Clark are trying to do this investigation and trying to figure out what is going on with the case of theirs. So eventually it leads to them going and finding out that there is this guy who is going around town with this metal mask on and a trench coat. And so that is to be the almost like Nazi or lightning symbols that were in one of Lois's photos. So eventually this guy is finding out, uh, the villain of this story is finding out that both Lois and Clark are, or Lois and Superman are on his trail. So this guy, this metal mask guy in this trench coat, eventually seeks Lois out to try and kill her, because if he kills her, he basically kills her story. So this man in the trench coat is to arrive to put a flamethrower upon Lois, and of course, Superman rushes in to get in the way. Uh, let's put a pin in that for a second. One thing that actually did bother me about this episode, when Clark was to lift the green vehicle and then later rushes into the phone booth, again, a classic thing of which that I love, because bringing it back to old school Superman, and that was amazing. But then after he gets out of the telephone booth and starts talking to the person, I'm immediately like, why should he have gone out of his way to ask this person about the event that had already happened, like some random person? Like, that wouldn't have made it seem like, oh, it wasn't actually that guy who was Superman. Like, no, because he asked me about the whole entire event. So, random person, like, if he would ask Lois Lane about it, or if he would ask some higher up person that is working on the Superman story, then, like, that would cause, like, some kind of real, like, it must not have been Clark, because he went out of his way to ask me every little bit about this Superman story. So I'm going to come to the conclusion that it's not actually him. But no, he just asked some random person about this story, I guess. Maybe like thinking if anybody like out of this crowd of people had come up quickly with any answer, saying like immediately, it's Clark, he did it. He saved these people, or he saved this person from this car. I didn't quite understand that scene, but let's move on. So, Superman is to arrive as this guy is to put a flamethrower upon Lois. So, we have Superman who. Let me get this straight. So this guy hits Superman with flamethrower, and is Superman's costume like flame retardant or something? Like, why isn't like any of his costume all of a sudden like either black or just torn up from the flames? Like, man, his like, is his suit from Krypton, or like what is the properties? Like is his like, how good is this Superman suit? Like, I don't know, like maybe like his mom's suit is way much more durable than his suit that he has on later in the show. Maybe his mom just made a really, really good suit. And then all of a sudden after that, like, you know how, like, eventually, like, the first iPhone is really, really good, but then, like, the 9 or 10 that come after that are really just crappy and they only last, like, a certain... Maybe that's the quality of these Superman suits, that eventually after the first one, it goes all downhill from there to where the suits just get more crappier, I guess. So... Superman just gets into the way, and he's like looking at Lois, and he's like, Lois, yeah. And then he's like looking at this villain. And so all of a sudden the villain is to go and throw these grenades and toss them at these people. And so Superman goes and heat visions off one of the grenades, and then runs and tries to do the Captain America thing, which is to run and try to have his hands kind of cover up the grenade as he's falling back. So like he explodes and he falls back, but he doesn't actually hurt anybody in the process. He just kind of like seals the explosion in with his hand, so like it doesn't get all over the place. Good for him. So, so after that, we have Superman that is to, of course, take this guy down, and then eventually he is to shake hands with Lois Lane, and so that is to eventually lead after the numerous times that that Lois, I guess, is to be in Superman's presence. Eventually, Superman is to do an interview with Lois, and so Lois is to do an interview with Superman, and she's kind of asking him like questions about his origin story, which most of which we already know. Lois was to mention or ask like, well, where exactly did your spaceship land? And Clark is like, and Superman's like, I'm not telling you that. Like, if anything, like, I will just tell you that my ship landed somewhere in the USA, but if anything, I've tried to learn every single language there is so that way I can go uh, and fight crime all across the planet. Eventually, he goes and speaking another language, and that he mentions anything is possible in a different language. So really, we have Superman that is a multilingual or languaged Superman. So like really telling us that eventually this show could basically go anywhere, any part of the world, and Superman will know the language of wherever that place is. So if we all of a sudden bizarrely have an entire episode that's done in Russian or German or something, Superman evidently could know that entire language. And why would you want to burden this actor of having to learn an entire language to get through an entire episode and be like, oh my god. Yeah, like man, this is whew, this is quite a task you guys are asking for. Um but anyways, so this whole interview after this whole interview is to be over, Lois is to talk to one of her coworkers, and really her coworker is to ask Lois, it's like, well, hey, like, if anything, you've been cozying up to Superman a lot. Do you ever think about wanting to go and have a candlelight dinner with him? And Lois is like, no, I'm not actually really all that interested. I'm like, wow, that's a surprise. Normally, I thought like Lois would be dancing between these two men fairly easily, but no, Lois says, like, you know what? I've been really liking this Clark Kent guy lately. Like, he's been really winning me over. And we have the entire time, like, Superman is like, say what now? Because super hearing. And so, like, Clark is easing in on this entire conversation. And so, like, Superman slash Kent knows that Lois has a interest in Kent, so it would have been really interesting to see that whole dialogue of like Lois like actually asking out Kent or vice versa, or like I would have liked to have seen that exchange to just kind of see like Kent just kind of like snickering after the fact to be like, I knew she liked me. I thought that would have been a cool exchange, but they didn't go into that. That would have been cool, but they didn't cover that stuff. So so shortly thereafter that they start going and they start jumping around a little bit to eventually like Superman and Lois dating, Superman and Lois getting married, Superman and Lois having a baby, and really Lois is like, well, like where should we deliver the children at? Like maybe one of our children is gonna have powers, and so Lois is like, but I don't really want to go and deliver our children at the Fortress of Solitude. And, like, Clark understands that. Let's a little bit also. So they also show the point of when Clark is going to tell Lois that he's Superman, and he basically does the exact same thing for his sons as he does for Lois. So Clark takes Lois to Smallville and takes her home to Martha, and Martha is like hugging Kent, and Kent is telling Martha, it's like, Mom, I think it's time for me to tell Lois that like I'm Superman. Like I think it's time now. And so the very next thing we see is that Clark is to fly up into the air while Lois is to watch him do it, explaining to her that he is Superman, and she accepts that. And then uh, Kent is to also propose to Lois while being in Superman costume, and then eventually they get married, and eventually they are to have kids. So all of a sudden, like Clark is realizing that a lot of stuff is going way too fast to the point of him not even understanding what day it is or like what importance of this day he is having. And so all of a sudden he's getting really like very jarred and he's very confused. All of a sudden to find out that actually he is in some like VR like setup that he is to take off, and Tal Rowe is to be at the Fortress of Solitude with Clark. Uh, so the reason why both Tal and both Cal are going through this whole thing together is Tal wants to understand why Clark loves this planet so much, why he's defending it, and like what is the reason why he's doing all these things and betraying his flesh and blood brother. Like, and so eventually Kal-El goes back into the whole like thing, back into this scenario, and eventually like starts to run through the rest of Clark's story till the very bitter end. But Superman is very weak right now, and like Tal is taking full advantage of him being so weak right now. So now we are back in current time with Lois and the Sons and Lana Lang and her family. So let's get to that. So Lois and Jonathan and Jordan. So Lois is talking to Lana Lang and Kyle, and like just talking about like from what had happened to the very last episode, and just kind of like the after effects of what Kyle had went through, and Jordan is talking. Jordan and Jonathan are talking to Sarah about the whole aftermath of what had happened from the last episode, and so Sarah is actually just thanking Jordan for just telling her the truth, because like really they could have told her nothing, and justifiably so. So Jonathan eventually leaves because Sarah wants to talk to Jordan alone, and so Sarah is to talk to Jordan alone, and so they are to quickly all of a sudden kiss, and Sarah is to tell Jordan, yeah, I don't want to be just friends anymore. Like, I'm like, wait a minute. How is it all of a sudden, like, it's great that this happened, but I'm like, what is the justification why Sarah is going after Jordan? Because I really would have thought that it seems that Jonathan has been putting a lot of brownie points talking to Sarah, and I'm a little confused that all of a sudden, like, Sarah is technically kissing Jordan, even though it's actually justified. Still, because it, like, Sarah wants to be with somebody right now, and I guess Jordan is the obvious choice, I guess. But also, like, I'm either assessing or assuming that there's going to be too many lies that Jordan is eventually going to have to say because of his powers, and then all of a sudden, eventually, I'm assuming Sarah eventually is probably going to end up like cheating on Jordan with Jonathan, because eventually it's going to probably happen, or that is just going to break up both Sarah and Jordan, and then they'll just fizzle out the way they fizzle out. So eventually, after the Cushings are to leave, so Lois and the two sons are out, and so they immediately think that they can hear that their father is coming back home, but instead they are to see Talro. And so basically Talro is threatening this family that he's basically going to kill Lois first, and then after kill her sons. But Jordan kind of steps up because technically he has powers, uses his heat vision against Talro, but sadly enough, Jordan's heat vision isn't strong enough, so he gets knocked back. And so really now, like, Talro is almost like, dude, I'm gonna kill this family. Like, there's no one that can stop me. And then all of a sudden, Superman just comes crashing in, like, from the sky because he doesn't have as good as power. And so Superman is like, you know what? I am going to give in to you, Talro. I'll do whatever you want as long as you do not hurt my family. And Talro was like, okay, so you're coming with me. So Talro is grabbing Kal-El and taking them off to showcase where Talro had his version of Fortress of Solitude, and his father is giving him the ropes about things. And what Talro had gone through to train, which was this like torturous red beam thing, was to hurt him consistently to strengthen him up, I guess. So that kind of sets up what is to probably go on to the next episode of the Desert Fortress of Solitude. And so also we have Lois, who's giving John Henry Irons a call to mention, you know what, like, what you were saying that eventually Superman was going to have to side with Kryptonians is technically true. Like, we need your help now more than ever. And so I'm guessing that's going to bring back Irons back into the play, and I guess have Irons be like this Earth's only defense until Superman can eventually go and try to get away from Talro and try to be on the winning side of things, because Superman probably does not want to be the villain of this story. But I think also that Superman, by the very end of this, had turned also like evil. It looked like he turned into like the Quest of Peace Superman, where it looks like he's a little bit more grizzled and he's a little bit of more like angry or upset or whatever kind of Superman, as if they like doused him with like red kryptonite from if you guys remember Smallville, when you put on the red kryptonite you would get angry. Kind of feels like that. But anyways, I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.